Okay, everybody. So the bell has literally tolled 8:30. Oh, that's been corrected from last night. So good evening. I'm Paul Harper, Chairman of the Planning and Healthcare Stronger Communities Policy Advisory Committee, and well, I welcome all my fellow councillors and anybody out there listening to us tonight to this meeting. We're being broadcast live and it'll be on the council's YouTube channel. So I just wanted to check if anybody here wanted to broadcast or record. Nope, that's fine, since we don't have Malcolm here. The other thing is, if there is a fire alarm and the bell's toll, Cassie will go and investigate on our behalf and then come and tell us what to do. It's never happened yet, so it's unlikely, I would think, to happen, so that's probably a tempting fate. I know, okay, well, it will bring the meeting to a quicker conclusion. So the first item is apologies. So we've got apologies from Claudine Russell, who's on holiday, and then everybody else is here. So notification of substitute members, Paddy.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Reardon for Councillor Russell.
Thank you. Urgent updates. There was an urgent update sent out yesterday, which is on the, I think, everybody's place, which was the forward to the arts and culture strategy. Hopefully people have had a chance to look through that and are happy to take that tonight as part of the agenda. Yeah, great. Then we've got notification of any visiting members. I don't see any, and nobody's on the computer. And then item 5, any disclosures by any members or officers on any reports tonight. Excellent. If we keep through this, we should be finished in 10 minutes. Next, but I'm here, so you know it won't be that quick. The next item is disclosure of lobbying. Has anybody been lobbied on anything here? Nope. Okay, then 7 is to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of their nature of any exempt information. I don't think there's anything on this agenda which needs to be done in exempt items, so I suggest we do it all in open agenda. Yeah. Excellent. And then we've got minutes of our meeting held on the 4th of June, which are pages 1 to 6. So if we just quickly skip through them for accuracy. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're happy to agree those as correct? Yeah. Then that brings us nicely onto agenda item number 9, which is our forward plan, which is on page 7 of our papers. I don't know if either of the cabinet members present have anything else to add to that at all. Don't feel you have to. Okay, has anybody any questions they'd like to ask at all on that? No? Okay, if we can agree that then, as noted. Brings us on to item number 10, which is a member request item on C2 care homes, which has been brought to us tonight by Councillor Brian Clark. So Brian, would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chairman. This is something where members may have had applications in their area. Quite recently, I've had 3. If you haven't had any applications in your area for C3 to C2 conversions, the chances are you probably will. I think this is something that spans all of our wards. Essentially, the applications that I've seen to date are applications for care homes, maybe to look after vulnerable adults, children, or the elderly. And the typical application would not involve any change to the building itself. So we may have certain character assessment documents, and it may be that there's we have Lewes Road area character assessment document in our area, and we have a neighbourhood plan, and we have obviously the planning documents for the council and the NPPF, but they're quite silent on this aspect of development, if you consider that you start off with a house and the residents are likely to have a bedroom in that house and you're likely to have carers in that house, the general sort of dynamic in the house seems to fit that of a residential setup. However, it is a commercial change, and we don't at the moment have safeguards that I feel that we should look to gain through an SPD, and that's the reason why I brought this to this committee. For instance, I'll give you an example of one of the applications in my area. There was a management plan that came with that application. In Lewes, the management plan explained that there was minimal impact on parking because there was a commercial parking lot opposite that development. There is no commercial parking lot, it's in a residential street. And it also mentioned how close the Barming station is for transport links through train, and Barming is nowhere near. So essentially that management plan was a cut and paste from another application. So you could almost assume that's got nothing to do with the application. However, we don't have any policies to say that a management plan should be correct. So we're sort of outside of planning policy, even though residents would feel that that's something that should be robust. The other thing is that while we might have vulnerable adults in the bedrooms, the recent one, the caregivers that were staying overnight would be sleeping on the sofa, and they would have no provision for any office space, so they would be essentially taking their computers around the house and working throughout the house. So these are just some examples that I feel show up a gap in the way that we approach this type of application. I'm not saying that we should not have this type of care provision in the community. I think it's better in certain instances to have this integration across the borough. I just feel that there are certain safeguards that we could put in place to make sure that the developers are bringing something forward that's genuinely added benefit to, or genuine amenity to the people in those homes and the people in the local area. So I'd like to end by proposing that we do move forward with this. The first option is for the Planning and Healthier Stronger Communities Policy Advisory Committee to request a report on the topic of a policy being developed and brought back to this committee in draft form for further consideration ahead of public consultation. And I feel that that can include not just recommendations how about we go about it, it can also look at what the current situation is in the borough, what are the needs. There's an element which I've mentioned in the last part, which is to do with beyond this type of provision, we might want to consider how we allocate care home provision generally in the borough as part of that piece of work. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Brian. Councillor English.
I don't have a problem with the report coming back, and I think it might be useful, but I would caution that the problem is slightly more intrinsic. As I've mentioned on a number of occasions, we don't actually have any local plan policies that really address care homes. So designing an SPD would be difficult because there isn't a local plan policy to hang it off of, which you need for an SPD. So I'm not against a report because I think it might flag up some issues that we need to pursue, but it may be that they're more useful in developing a future local plan policy than they are in delivering a immediate SPD. I still think it's valuable work and the committee should have the report, and I think Councillor Clark's onto something. I just caution that it may not quite deliver the exact route that the request is suggesting.
Thank you, Clive. I'm happy to second the proposal. I think it would be useful for evidence to come to us, as you say. Clive, it might either help with a future local plan or whatever we might wish to do with it then. But I think it would be useful to know things like the number of conversions of houses which have been undertaken over the last few years, and also the concentration of care homes. Obviously, some of the sort of information we've gathered about HMOs to enlighten us on that. It would be useful to have similar information perhaps on care homes to enlighten a debate on that. Yeah. Councillor Peely.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely support Councillor Clark's suggestion that we look at it. Had 20 years experience of working in care, and that has included working in some residential homes that have been converted houses, and they have been abysmal, tight corners, all sorts of things. But absolutely, it's something, even if it can't do what you think, there are so many aspects of this that are definitely worth exploring. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to ask any comments or add anything? If not, oh, sorry, yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I will say that I didn't want to be prescriptive, and in this option I'm not being prescriptive. So while I mention an SPD, really I think we need to start the conversation, look at what the issues are, look at what's going on in the borough currently, and work out how we can integrate that into policy. So it's really something that I feel we have a need to address it. Hopefully this report that comes back to our committee will give us guidance on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I assume everybody's happy with that recommendation? Great, thank you, that's unanimous. And thank you for bringing that issue forward. That brings us on to agenda item number 11, which is the Maidstone Local Bus Focus Group update. I'm assuming, Clive, is it you to introduce?
Yeah, there's slightly slips over responsibilities because Councillor Harwood is the responsible cabinet member, but I've been chairing the bus focus group, and following the sort of abolition of the previous liaison committee we had with KCC and the bus operators, legislation was introduced which allowed the establishment of local bus partnerships, and we've now had, with the able assistance of Mr. Gilbert, 2 meetings, which the first was very much setting up the framework for operations and meetings with the bus operators, so terms of reference, so that was basically housekeeping and setting it up. We've had since then one major discussion meeting, and another one will be happening shortly, roughly quarterly, and we focused on a number of issues that were vexing the operators in relation to updating fleets, looking at what grants could be applied for, in particularly with a view to improving the air quality in Maidstone through upgrading the bus fleets of various operators. And looking at the effect of proposed traffic regulation orders and parking on the bus services. So far it's early days, but the signs are that both the county council officers, it remains to be seen how the new administration fits into this, but county council officers, bus operators and ourselves have had some useful discussions in it, and at least it gives us the chance to have some sort of strategic discussion about public transport, which have been sorely lacking. So I'm moderately optimistic that it will prove to be a useful addition to the council's partnership working. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
I'm looking around. Does anybody any points I wish to raise on it? I've got one, Clive, if that's all right. I was just thinking, as you sort of laid out, that the first meeting was really around terms of reference. So you obviously had one meeting where you're starting to lay the route forward. So I just wondered if it might be useful perhaps for us to have a further review, perhaps after the next 2 meetings, because hopefully by then you'll be getting some actions coming out of them, and we'll actually see more, dynamism coming out on the areas, which I know you're quite passionate about. So
it is the intention that as things move on, the first working meeting was mostly about setting up things to actually investigate. As we get reports back, then obviously, and work actually happens, I'm happy to report back to this committee as agreed and update people. There will also be some cross-reporting from Councillor Thompson in relation to some work that we're hoping to we are intending to undertake on air quality feasibility mapping to see where the issues are and what solutions can be adopted, because obviously, well, fairly obviously, I suppose, there will be some implications for public transport and possibly Hackney carriage drivers, so that there will be some reporting back from Councillor Thompson as well, I should think, because of the crossover.
Clive, Councillor Clark.
It was really just a small point to say, to sort of frame the sort of bus service improvement plan. The government has allocated KCC 23 million for this year, so 25 to 26, 11 million capital, 12 million revenue. But it, as Clive mentioned, it really is the key part here is we work with officers, but obviously there's been a big change at KCC. So in the next few weeks and months, we should find out the appetite for the administration at KCC on this element.
Okay, so can I propose that we note the report and ask for a further review after the next two meetings? Yeah, okay, great, thank you. That's that one, which brings us on to Arts and Culture Strategy 2025 to 2030, starting on page 22 of your papers. So, Clive?
Yes, Councillor Thompson apologises, but he's had to go to a trustee meeting this evening, so he's asked me to deputise for him. I'm very honoured to do so, because I think that our arts and cultural strategy is one of the most important things we can do in a number of ways. We've all talked about the importance over the years of economic development, regeneration, maintaining the health of the town centre and so on, and these are and rural service centres as well. It's quite important to realise, as I'm sure all members do and officers, that the nature of town centre economies has massively changed over the last few years, and we can no longer depend on a retail-led town centre. And therefore, what we do in terms of our cultural and art strategy, I've turned it round deliberately there, is important, because if we are going to have a dynamic town centre for the businesses that remain and the people of Maidstone and possibly a wider area, we have to have things that attract people in, things that create footfall, for want of a better term, events, such as Councillor Nagy would doubtless be saying in my ear, the River Festival, to give an example, or the Renaissance Fair, or the Big Gay Out the other day, which many people enjoyed. It doesn't really matter as long as their events are taking place. The cultural and arts strategy is a major economic driver for Maidstone now, and as a refresh strategy will be a major economic driver in the future. It is also worth doing from a cultural point of view, because Maidstone, it has a very strong history, cultural identity. Unfortunately, not enough people, especially in Maidstone, appear to know that, and it is important that we raise the profile and the engagement of the public, not just for its own sake, but because it's been proven time and time again that involvement in arts and cultural activities is beneficial to the health not of a community, but not just of a community, but of the public that live, work and visit those communities. And the evidence is there that a culturally vibrant community, town like ours, benefits in all sorts of ways in terms of psychological and even physical health from a vibrant cultural scene. So I'm happy to say that this report has my full support, and hopefully the support of all members of the council and officers, because we as a town, as a borough I should say, not just the town, because there are many cultural activities taking place outside the town centre which we mustn't forget, will truly need this strategy to succeed if we are going to have the future that I hope that we will deserve. Would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Clive, for that very good summation of the strategy. I'd just like to add, going back to the first one back in 2018, it was actually when I became chair of what was, I think, then Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, that I propose that we actually appoint an arts officer, and she's still luckily with us here, Anne-Marie, and that, we move forward with the first version of the arts and culture strategy. And very much Clive has highlighted the rationale. My experience elsewhere in terms of theatre business and so on was economic regeneration. And we're talking back in 2018-19 when we approved the last one, was a major driver for economic regeneration in towns. Even more so now, with the change in the nature of town centres, it's even more important to invest in arts and culture. And it has also the benefit, I think, of bringing all the various communities within the borough, cultural, ethnic, all the diverse communities together. And it can give us the opportunity through events like the Mela to celebrate, and the Chinese New Year, and so, to celebrate each other's cultures and to actually enhance everybody's lives through understanding other people's cultures. And so I've been passionate about this whole area ever since I came on the council. I was really happy when we managed to push it forward in 2018 and to see that it has been then adopted by the previous Conservative administration, kept it going, and now the current one. So I'm really happy that we're now putting forward a proposal to take us through to 2030. One of the things I think we should try to work on to enhance in it over the next year or two, and I've spoken separately with Anne-Marie on this, is around the idea of trying to get more minority group representation into our arts and culture, where there's a lot of really good work done by everybody, but when you look at the list of the groups we consulted, or the existing groups and the individuals, you do see a fair bias towards the majority population group in the borough. And I think it would be good if over the next 5 years we can try to widen that out more, just to bring the enlightenment to everybody that would do. So I'm more than happy to propose the recommendation tonight that we endorse and accept the arts plan. Can I see a seconder for that? Thank you. I see everybody wants to second it. Could I ask if anybody would like to speak on it at this stage? Right now, Brian. Hold on.
So I think,
and I've got Donna, and then was it Paddy? Did you put your hand up? Yeah. Right, okay. So Councillor Cott.
A simple point, really. I think sometimes if you've got a hook to hang things off of, you will find that there will be all manner of things that can hang off of that hook. And this is the one. I went to a end of year sixth form event for Valley Park School, actually, and they rented a barn in Sandling, and they set up all of the space, and it was really quite remarkable. But if I'd have gone to a classroom setting, it still would have been remarkable, but they set it up in a way where it really felt like you were going to a professional art event. And it's funny because I was talking to some of the teachers, and they said, it's funny because we've had some people in and they've asked, would they be able to make offers for some of the artwork? So it gives you an idea of how that sort of sense comes about in that type of setting. And we've got lots of schools, we've got lots of talented sixth formers. And again, as we move forward, we look at things like Creative Maidstone, we've got somewhere where we can start to, see those opportunities to bring those sort of elements in. So I very much welcome it. I think we're moving right in the right direction.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
I just wanted to say that I agree with all the comments made. It's a great strategy. Obviously, looking at All Saints Church, they already have a fantastic bell ringing group that entertain the town every Thursday evening, and it would be lovely to turn that more into a creative and cultural place that we could go to. We had the VE Day concert there recently, which I think everybody thoroughly enjoyed that attended. I agree with the comment about getting more the community involved in different ways. I ran a workshop, I think it was about 8-9 years ago, with some ladies from the Afghan community, and they have the most amazing creative skills. We did some textiles, some jewellery making, and it would be lovely to have the opportunity for them to work on those skills and work with the creative Maidstone Hub going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, Councillor Wilkins. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to see on item 1.1, look for opportunities to invest in new public artworks for the public realm, provide support to developers with public art plans for private developments. I really think it's important that we have some really great pieces of art works in the town centre that have got the wow factor, especially like murals. If you've been to Ashford, they've got the mural festival there, which brought a lot of footfall to the town. If you go to places like Liverpool, they've got murals all over the place and they're just stunning. And I think that we should try and follow their footsteps. Oh, and also, can I just say, it would be great if Proms in the Park could be revived, but it probably won't be.
I like that last idea. Councillor Keeley, and then Councillor Reardon. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to reiterate what all the other councillors have said, and over the weekend, the things coming off of like some of the Facebook groups about the reggae thing was absolutely brilliant. Everybody was saying what a fabulous free event. I didn't see one, oh my god, the beer was expensive, or the such and such. Everyone was saying what a fabulous free day out it was. And the art thing that Councillor Wilkinson suggested, completely, it's a really cool idea. So yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor English, and
one of the benefits of having an art policy is that when one gets planning applications, we can theoretically seek planning contributions either for public art or for events taking place in and around the town centre. Should those applications be either in the town centre or, like the Marks and Spencer's application, have an impact on the town centre. So there are opportunities there that we could potentially look as a result of that policy for funding. Now, whether that would include a specific event like Proms in the Park, we would have to see. But if the funding were to be topped up, hypothetically, there would be some possibility, but obviously they would have to be measured against other events that could take place. There are other potential funding sources that could be looked at, but some of those would depend very much on the views of local members in a particular ward. So if there was an event taking place in Moat Park, which is in your ward, it would be in your ball court to actually look at whether or not you feel that would be a particular, and the public in your ward, whether that was an appropriate use of that money. So there are ways to do these things, but having a strategy gives us a foundation to base those approaches on. Just on the public art more generally, we do have a number of proposals that will be coming forward for what you might broadly call either, well, some of these would be historical monuments and some of them would be public art, and some of them are restorations of existing features such as clocks in the sports pavilion in Pennington Heath, but there are a number of issues being pursued from various funding pots at the moment. And I hope people will see that public art, very broadly defined, will be a major feature going forward.
Councillor Reardon.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Just to say I'm very happy to second this, and I agree totally with what members have said, and to thank Councillor English for his summation. Very detailed and very informative. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wish to know? In which case, we've got the proposal, it's been moved and seconded. Can I assume everybody's agreeable to it? Yeah, excellent, that's unanimous. Well, thank you very much, Clive, for introducing that, and thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for the work you've done since you came here and taken this further forward again. Thank you very much. So that brings us on to our last item for tonight, which is the adoption of houses in multiple occupancy supplementary planning document, running from pages 64 through to 166. So can I ask Councillor Harwood to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, we've all been involved in this journey. I think this supplementary planning document has been delivered at pace after a period of false starts, let's say, where there were motions and so on, references from planning committee and so on. There definitely are some challenges within some of the urban wards relating to this type of accommodation. I mean, particularly in High Street Ward and also in your own ward, Chairman, and my ward. And this document, which is starts at page 75, the draft supplementary planning document, I think it could prove to be an exemplar in its field, in that we were able to use hooks within the local plan review, and we were able to use hooks within the National Planning Policy Framework to actually take a pragmatic approach to things like concentrations of HMOs, sandwiching and so on. And also, I think the critical point for many of us on planning committee is that hopefully we can drive up quality and standards, which has been patchy, in that there are some really very good houses in multiple occupation, and there are others that are less so. Hopefully we now have the policy armoury for the planners and for the planning committee to ensure that we can have the best possible accommodation for future residents of HMOs, but that we mitigate impacts upon the neighbouring community and surrounding areas. I think it's true to say that I think all of us as councillors, I mean, particularly, you know, I mean, some wards, I mean, Palace Wood has 0 HMOs, for example, but we have many hundreds, obviously. But we see both sides of the HMO debate, in that homelessness issues are some of the most difficult challenges we work with those you know, very vulnerable members of our community. And to be frank, houses in multiple occupation, because they will often work with universal credit, they deliver the accommodation that we cannot find through other routes. So we all see the plus side, but we also see some of the downsides, particularly in Victorian terrace streets, where parking is at a premium, where space for a wheelie bin is at a premium, and where the can not necessarily be the best neighbours in some cases. So hopefully this document, within our powers, and I think that's the critical point. I know there have been issues raised about could we go further on parking. Well, no, because we can go with the Kent County Council adopted parking standards and work on them, but it's a supplementary planning document, not a development plan document, so we cannot create policy. We can only finesse the existing policies, if you like, the existing policy framework. So we're aware of some of the issues that have come up, but I think actually the consultation responses are very interesting and very balanced. And I think often you know you've got a document right when you get a challenge from both sides. And I think there are people who are very supportive of this form of accommodation or want greater controls on them. But we can go as far as we can go within the policy framework that we work with. I am very aware that we have a packed audience of policy colleagues who have lived and breathed this issue in recent months and waded through a lot of consultation responses and so on. So I don't know whether Tom or Mark or Karen want to come in at this stage, just to set the scene?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Harwood. I think it may be the fairest thing to do here to see if Tom Huang, who led on the document, has anything to say in terms of summary of contents and approach.
Other officers wish to make any comments at this stage? No. Okay, I just want from the chair to say a couple of comments before I open it, so I'll take the opportunity. I welcome this document. As everybody in this room knows, I've been pushing the issue of HMOs now for longer than I care to think in this council, and it's good to see that we're making traction. I think, as Councillor Harwood said, we're limited in terms of HMOs up to 6 bedrooms because they're allowed under permitted development rights. What we can do is influence HMOs over 6 bedrooms, so 7 bedrooms plus, because they require planning permission. And this document helps us address that. So it's not a full panacea because HMOs up to 6 bedrooms will still be submitted, and in my own ward there's been a couple over in the last month for up to 6 bedroom HMOs which go under permitted development rights, but at least the larger ones, this gives us an opportunity to start to put some controls in. And I was glad to see that in terms of the response rate, 28% came from my own ward, from Fountain Oakwood, which is one of the areas, as members will know, has been most affected and where there's been probably one of the largest areas of verbal concern expressed. So it's good to see that the largest element of response came from there. High Street also got 14%, and again, large numbers of HMOs. If you actually look at the appendix, somewhere it's got the list of how many we've got. And if we just look at 3 wards, so High Street, Fountain Oakwood and Pennington Heath, you come to over 80% of the HMOs in the borough are located in those 3 wards, all of which are either in the town centre or abutting the town centre. So one of the things that would be useful to have, and obviously I doubt there will be time prior to the Cabinet, I anyway would be interested in seeing a breakdown of the responses, if we could do, by those 3 wards, because those are the people who've got the living evidence of HMOs, because they're actually living amongst them, as opposed to obviously the wider borough, where we've got a lot of people putting in their own thoughts, but don't necessarily have that first-hand experience. So perhaps if we could get that information pulled out from all the data for some point fairly soon in the future, I think that would be very useful. I've got one concern with this, which is around the concentration thresholds. I know it sounds very pedantic, but that's about where we refer to the number of HMOs within a geographical radius of an application. So at the moment, it talks about if within 100 metres radius of an application, there's 10% or more HMOs already in that area, then we would tend to be adverse to allowing any further HMOs in that area. The idea of a concentration threshold, I think, is incredibly good, but I think when we're starting to look at the most heavily built up parts of High Street, Pennenden Heath and Fanton Oakwood, 100 metres is it can actually be quite a large area and bring in a very large number of properties, whereas I would suggest, and I think I did when we were talking about this before, consider that if it was reduced to 50 metres, you would be looking much more in a local neighbourhood. But if you look on the map on page 103, before us, which is the analysis based on this 100 metre radius, none of these examples would meet that criteria. However, I would think if we had the criteria set at a 50 metre radius, and if you look at the concentrations in the area 3 and area 2, well, actually in all those areas, the likelihood is that you would be meeting those criteria because you're looking at very heavily built up areas. And 150 metres, when you're looking at, I can see some of the roads I know, places like Charles Street, Douglas Road, Florence Road, you bring in a lot of people because they're very densely built up areas. Typical house is only 12 to 20 foot wide, so you don't have to go far before you have a large number of houses. And a 10% and 10% threshold within those areas has a really big impact. So my suggested amendment really would be that we adopt the recommendations here and we add in, and I suppose I'll move it because I've got the privilege of talking, that we added a further recommendation that in terms of the concentration threshold, they be amended to 10% within a 50 metre radius. Because I think the evidence from the consultation, if you look at the comments coming up on pages 139 and in 6.4 of the additional comments, the highest number of views expressed was about the concentration and the density of HMOs. And I think if we moved to, say, adjust it from 100 metres to 50, we would be addressing one of the most serious points of concern which has come out and has been raised with me even in the last couple of days by local residents. So I'd like to say formally move the 3 recommendations before us and then add in that as a further recommendation. And can I see, before I come to Stan, can I see if there's a seconder for that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Chairman. Concentrations was perhaps one of the most intense areas of debate as this document evolved, and I would like to bring the officers in, if I could, just to explain the technical framework that we're working in, because that you may find you might need to tweak your recommendation on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Harwood. I will bring in Tom Hwang into this, but I would like to provide a summary for councillors tonight as to where we stand and how we got to this point. We've come quite a long way down the road for this supplementary planning document. It's been noted that we've moved fairly swiftly, and in terms of a supplementary planning document, it's absolutely right. We have moved fairly quickly when you consider the amount of evidence which has been gathered. We've undertaken a public consultation and so forth. We've also had to liaise with colleagues and those who had been associated with implementing the supplementary planning document as well. Now, what that has meant is that the 100-metre radius has been based on evidence. It has to be based on evidence in order for it to go forward and to be considered appropriate for inclusion within the supplementary planning document. And that evidence has been built up over this time through the production process and in discussion with those who will implement it, including colleagues in development management. We found that the 100-metre radius is something which is supportable, it is evidenced, and that has been demonstrated through Appendix 1 of the HMO SPD itself. So we have provided reasoned justification, which is the threshold that we are required to provide for a supplementary planning document within Appendix 1 of that SPD itself to support the 100-metre radius. So from a technical view, and obviously that's my remit, officers would certainly recommend that we retain the 100-metre threshold for now because it is evidenced. However, I am also mindful of the fact that we are in a fortuitous position as a local planning authority to assess how that is working in practice, how implementation and delivery of the supplementary planning document is going, how that is taking place. So we may, if we want to further down the line, once we have allowed this supplementary planning document to bed in and assess the results, wish to reconsider that threshold to see whether or not it is still fit for purpose and so forth. So I will bring in Tom Huang in case she has anything further to add, but that would be our recommendation from an officer point of view.
Bring in Councillor Forecast.
Thank you, Chairman, and I know that this is a issue that's impacted you and your residents. I think firstly, this is quite good, but I have a few, and I know we've gone back and forth on HMOs, and Councillor Hold, you alluded to it, I was probably one of those who wanted to go further on the parking, but looking at this and the one space per flat policy you're implementing seems to be the as far as we can go within our remit, and I thank you for that. Just so I completely understand that that's the case, that if there's it's one car park space per room, isn't it? Yeah, but is that true? So if there's 6 rooms, there'd be 6 car parking spaces, let's say, or whatever. Okay, a few comments then. The point that Councillor Harper made, I'm happy to support that, and I'm mindful we don't want to delay the implementation of the SPD. So it'd be good to get some guidance on what gathering evidence for a shorter concentration radius might mean, and if it's going to be an extensive piece of work, perhaps we can look at ascertaining urgent evidence for the particular wards that are impacted by HMOs, Fant, Pennenden Heath, and High Street. Just a few more comments, I'm afraid. Just quickly, the Palace. It said Palace Wood doesn't have any HMOs, that's not true, because I've sat here and spoke against one in Trapham Road, so I don't know where that number come from, and hopefully doesn't mean that the rest of the numbers are wrong, but that's not true, that Palliswood doesn't have any. And then in terms of comments on the actual document, on page 93, 3.18d, it says, where sustainable transport choice exists, alternative solutions to extensive parking should be considered. I'm happy for it to be considered, but does that weaken the one space per one flat policy? So you'll look into alternative solutions and a bike shed. I don't think that's going to do anything, but ultimately, will the policy be able to turn this down if councillors were minded to? So that's the first question. Page 95. Again, it mentions about, 3.25b, it mentions about when parking isn't sufficient, there have to be an assessment of some description. If that assessment's provided, again, can that overrule the parking policy itself, or is that just an assessment to allow it to be considered? And then just lastly, sorry, I'm rumbling slightly. The point about sandwiching is sorry, so forgive me if I'm being a bit thick. Is that saying that won't happen, so that there can't be two HMOs either side of a residential property? And then just lastly, while we're talking about the concentration point, does that also apply to HMOs that qualify for permitted development? So will they be considered as part of that, percentage of dwellings? So I appreciate there's a lot there, but if you can come back, that'd be great.
Yeah, obviously a supplementary planning document is a material planning consideration. So it's taken into account and it informs the balancing act that has to take place with every planning application. And a lot of factors feed into that as to what weight you give to certain policies. But I think in terms of the detailed questions, it's probably best to bring Mark or Tom in, because they are technical planner questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, this is something which I think is better for Tom Hwang as the author of the primary author of the SPD to deal with. I would say that obviously the thresholds themselves have been developed over a period of time, which obviously the point I made earlier, and also in consultation with colleagues in development management who will need to implement them as well. And I think they're probably thinking those thresholds are already as a sort of minimum amount without reducing them further. But I will let Tom Hwang come in regarding the various points which have been raised. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So essentially, if there's an application for a 7-8 bed HMO, and they consider these other alternatives, but ultimately they don't have one space per one bedroom or one flat, whatever we're calling it, is that can we turn around and say, irrespective of what you've provided in terms of bike shelter or whatever else, we can turn this down because we're still concerned about the parking?
I think the same response. It depends upon the circumstances, and we just need to be reasonable when we make planning determinations. So that's why you do not have hard and fast policies. There will be situations where it will work and situations where it won't. But as you know, housing multiple occupation very often go to planning committee, and the planning committee, for the first time, will have a supplementary planning document which has a set of policies, and the weight that the planning committee members give the policy may be different from the professional officer recommendation, and we'll need to see whether potentially an inspector from the planning inspectorate feels the same way. So I think there's a really interesting point which has come out of a number of the interventions, in that there will be a period of testing and proving this document, which may then lead to a requirement to tweak some of the policies therein, and that may be some of the issues around concentration that have been talked about, where currently we have an evidence base that says one thing, but contact with the real world may throw up some different evidence that we can take into account. And I think the issue around how the policies are actually used by planners and planning committee and how effectively they work at appeal, again, is an area where we're almost keeping it under review. So this needs to be a living document to ensure that it has the optimal benefit for all involved, all stakeholders. Thank you.
Councillor English.
Yes, I mean, as Councillor Harwood has said, this is going to evolve. What it will helpfully do is, it's not a sort of slam dunk, but it is a fairly heavy material consideration, and which will be weighed in the balance. We've had a lack of material considerations to set against the general pattern which supports these developments. So it's a useful lever, but it isn't the final solution to every problem. What it is an evolving document. So what I would hope we would do as a council is go forward with the document, and as it is being used, assess what the impact is, which will give us, in effect, the evidence that you're looking for. So I think the quickest way to get the evidence is actually to adopt this document, and then very carefully assess what the practical effect is. And if it isn't working to the degree that we'd hope, then that review the officers have talked about would be informed by the evidence that is accumulating about the effect of the implementation of the SBD. So actually that is in practice the quickest, simplest and cheapest way to actually get the evidence that we might need to tighten it up. So I don't think it's an either or, I think it's possibly both.
Okay, before I bring in Councillor Greenan and Councillor Clark, I just want to quickly ask a question, I suppose, of the officers in terms of this concentration threshold. So as Councillor Forecast was just saying, if we have now until the 23rd of July when this goes up to Cabinet, is that sufficient time for the officers to be able to do some work on the difference between bringing in a 50-metre threshold and a 100-metre threshold, given that's 3 weeks? And bearing in mind that both Northampton and Portsmouth both operate with 10% within a 50-metre radius. So there's two other local authorities with highly built-up areas. such as we have around the town centre, who've already got the radius of 50 metres. So I suppose my question is there time to get that evidence for the Cabinet?
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Chairman. As an officer, I have to provide technical advice to you as to what is required, perhaps in terms of evidence and so forth. I've provided advice tonight to indicate that a document such as a supplementary planning document can't be taken lightly and changed on an ad hoc basis. It must be based on robust evidence. There is something called reason justification that must be applied when producing the guidance policy clarification contained therein. I am not confident at this stage that there is any sufficient evidence, technical evidence, to justify a 50-metre threshold. We have undertaken evidence-based work which is contained within Appendix 1 and summarised in Appendix 1. We have undertaken public consultation, and we have had a consultation with colleagues who are going to be in charge of implementing this SPD, including development management. Our advice that we have received is that 100 metres is going to be a difficult threshold, but one we can theoretically achieve. 50 metres or below 100 metres at this stage is not evidenced and is going to be difficult for us to achieve and implement. So my advice at this stage is we should proceed with what has been subject to consultation, subject to a long process of evidence gathering and consultation, has got us to this stage. We should attempt to implement on that basis and then review so that we have then evidence based on the facts, based on the applications, based on the certificates of lawfulness, that we can then use to establish whether a revised threshold is necessary. So it isn't really about whether a couple of weeks is going to be sufficient for us to change a threshold. We need those applications to come in, we need those certificates of lawfulness to come in, and then we need to have further discussions with colleagues such as development management, and then bring that back to establish whether or not indeed there is an opportunity to change that threshold, and whether or not we undertake further changes to the SPD, including any necessary further public consultation and informal engagement that would be commensurate with the regulatory requirements associated with the production of such documents. Thank you.
I'd just like to ask us, if you look on pages 106 and 108, the most recent adopted guidance of all of those authorities is Northampton Borough Council, which is March 2023. And presumably, I assume that you've looked at all of these documents since you're quoting them, and they have a 50-metre radius in their policy HO3, delivering homes of multiple occupation. And then again, Portsmouth City Council adopted October 2019, houses in multiple occupation, ensuring mixed and balanced community supplementary planning document. They've also got a 10% concentration within a 50-metre radius. So surely if we were doing the research, as you've stated, yes, some of these others have a radius, some say not applicable, but those two authorities clearly have come up with a 50-metre radius. And I can't for the life of me believe that neighbourhoods in inner Portsmouth and inner Northampton are that radically different to neighbourhoods surrounding the town centre. Clive. Well, no, I'd like an answer if possible to that, and then I'll bring in Clive.
If I may just add one final point, we mustn't gauge our supplementary planning document for our borough on evidence for Northampton. We must base it on evidence for Maidstone Borough, and that is what we have done. So our advice as officers must remain the same to councillors. Thank you.
Councillor English.
Listen, I'm not It's not showing a red light, so hopefully it's still working despite the lack of a red light. Right, the choice here isn't between a 100-metre threshold and a 50-metre one. It's in the short term between a 100-metre threshold and no threshold. Because we cannot, in the short term, simply take evidence from another local authority, slot it into our SPD and expect to get away with it. As I said a few minutes ago, the quickest solution is to adopt this SPD with the current threshold and measure it intently to see whether it's working. If it isn't working, that's going to collect the evidence about as quickly as you possibly can collect it. Because any proper evidence has got to be based on what's happening in Maidstone. The current evidence generally supports a 100-metre threshold, but if members are right, and they may well be right, and a lower threshold is required and desirable, then we will quickly be able to evidence that by the progress of applications and processes that come in. There really isn't a quicker way of doing it, or a more effective and cost-effective way of doing it. So as I said earlier, it really isn't either or. It's a question of which order you put it in, because if we go down the road that has been suggested by Councillor Harper, and I understand why he's doing it, we will simply not have an SPD that will work in regard to concentration, because I can tell you, on Coulton, Cobley and Hall, who don't want the restrictions, and there are a number of people out there, commercial interests, that don't want the restrictions, will be able to challenge it and say that it's not sound, and we will not be able to use it as the document in that respect, at least as a material planning consideration. So we will have wasted everyone's time, we'll have got the public's expectations up, and we will have comprehensively failed to deliver on them. So for the sake of a shortcut, we will actually be extending the process of having a working document quite considerably. And I don't recommend that. I have been a planning officer in the past, and I've seen where shortcuts like this can lead, despite the commendable motives, and I do think the motives are commendable behind them. So I really hope that you don't go down that path.
Okay, I can see I'm on a hiding to nothing on this tonight. So I will change what I'm suggesting. I suggest we adopt the 3 recommendations before us, but there is still a 4th one that we review in 6 months' time, say, the criteria concerning the concentration thresholds, but that we restrict the review in terms of the neighbourhoods immediately surrounding the town centre, which are the most densely built up areas where the biggest issues are, and the threshold of distance has its highest impact. That way we can get it through tonight, you can get this enforced, it will give us time in the next 6 months to do that review of the real central area of Maidstone, and then we potentially can amend it at that point, which would have given us time to build up the evidence base. So that's my, have you got all that? Okay, so I'm moving that we adopt the 3 recommendations before us, and then that we had a 4th recommendation that we review in 6 months' time the concentration thresholds with a view to looking at the areas closest to the town centre, neighbourhoods closest to the town centre, which would be in parts of High Street, Fan and Pennington Heath, because, okay, and that's the resolution. I mean, the narrative is obviously those are the most densely built up parts of the borough. Neighbourhoods are different in that area compared to elsewhere. So that's my additional recommendation. Is that seconded? Excellent. Now we go back to, I've got Donna and Brian. No, Councillor Keeley. Oh no, actually Councillor Clark and Councillor Keeley.
I think we've moved on. I was actually going to just mention about the previous amendment. The fact that we're keeping this as is, I think will make it a lot more robust, and that's what we all want. I commend your thoughts, and I think that having a review is something that this committee is here for, so I think that that's very reasonable.
Councillor Keeley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts on here. It talks about guidance to minimising concern in the consultation, and I've just picked two out because a lot of HMOs are fine. A lot of HMOs are not a problem. I lived in we called it bedsits or flat shares when I was a teenager back in 1980 something. So that's a huge part of it, that a lot of them are fine, but when you've got a problem one, it is a problem, and if you've had problem neighbours, I'm sure you could understand that. So on page 133 and 137, there's a couple of comments about what causes the problems, and I just wondered if there's anything we could do around enforcement and putting that in the policy, because I might have missed it, but I didn't see that in there, and I just wondered your thoughts on that, because if we've got a robust enforcement thing and some from the guidance of how we deal with when there are problems, which does arise, how that can be, if we can do anything around that, because that would deal with problems as they arose rather than trundling on and somebody having to live in a miserable area for 5 years or something until the tenants clear off. Thank you.
It would depend on what sort of enforcement we're talking about. If it's planning enforcement, it could conceivably go in this document. If it was environmental health or community protection, then that would be another policy area and not a planning document. But so we would need to, members would need to pick up those concerns with myself or Councillor Nagy as the relevant portfolio holders. But and like with the parking, we're looking at infant, so I'm quite happy to look at any environmental health and related considerations as they arise, but it wouldn't be in this particular document.
I just wondered why they were questions in the consultation if they're not going to be.
It's
not a criticism. We've asked the questions and people have said I'm not anti them, but I'm anti them when this happens and when this happens. Just seeing how we could move that forward. But thank you, Councillor English.
Okay, anybody else? Any comments or questions or points? No? Anyone from the Cabinet? Councillor Hall, do you wish any final comments at all or not?
I mean, the only closing comment was housing colleagues and licensing colleagues were heavily involved with spatial planners in terms of framing the consultation and working that up, and the relevant housing team who deal with HMO issues are very well apprised of some of the issues and the challenges that are faced, and I don't think we can take a planning consultation about specific issues, but what I would say is that that many of those residents affected are speaking to and have spoken to the relevant officers within the housing team who do address and deal with these issues, particularly the issues of licensing on a daily basis. So, you know, hopefully nobody's concerns will fall through the cracks. I think that's what I'm saying.
Councillor Clark, did you?
Just housekeeping. So will we then put this as part of the forward plan for this committee? The review that. I'm just thinking of where we formally put this.
Yeah, actually, if we agree the amendment, then we need to plan it for 6 months hence, don't we? In the planning process, so that it does come back. And it'd be useful if at least by that point we've got the breakdown, as I was saying, of the actual consultation responses by Fountain Oakwood, High Street and Pennington Heath, because that will, I think, provide further guidance to us when we're looking at that. So yeah, we build that in. So is it everybody? Okay, is that all right?
Yeah. I was just thinking we need a placeholder in the committee so we know that it's there and coming.
Yeah, it'll be in the minutes, won't it? Everybody knows what we want to do. So can I ask show of hands of those in favour of the amended resolution, please? Excellent, that's unanimous. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing this in action. And at that point, I'll close the meeting. Thanks very much for everybody for coming.